All right, so we are going to do week 8 now. So this will be a longer lecture, unlike last week's, and as you will have already seen that from the slides, I did this morning change up the readings and add some material to the slideshow. So if you looked at that before about 10 o'clock this morning, I've changed a lot of that stuff I changed the reading that you'll use for the group assignment, and I added a reading to the stuff that we'll cover in the lectures. Additionally, note that this week you have the annotated bibliography due. So I added some instructions just a few minutes ago to the Dropbox. So let me read over this briefly. So an annotated bibliography is, in short, a list of research sources with some notes about what those sources say and how they fit into your thesis. That's the general description of the assignment. So you're going from the thesis assignment to this now. So I want you to choose a thesis to articulate. Preferably, you'll use one of the ones from the thesis assignment just because that makes it easier for everyone. Makes it easier for you, makes it easier for me. You don't have to do that, though, if just none of those suit you or interest you. If you are going to pick something other than what's on from one of the thesis that you already did, please email me before you start doing your work on your bibliography so that I can see whether I can tell you whether or not that thesis is going to work for our context in this course. So you're going to do these things. You're going to pick and articulate one thesis. So this time you only have to deal with one topic, one thesis, right? Not 5. So as I said, preferably this is one of the 5 from the earlier thesis assignment. And for that one topic, one thesis, you're going to find 4 distinct sources, right? So that means 4 distinct books, 4 distinct articles, preferably not 4 articles from one website either. So, and when I say website, so, like JSTOR isn't a website, right? In the sense that I'm talking about. So it would be, you could get 4 articles from like different journals on JSTOR. If you find like an anthology of articles, again, you could use 4 articles from that. What I want to avoid is you taking like 4 articles from like Debatepedia or whatever it's called, or 4 articles from one particular news source or anything like that. I don't want you to do that because that won't represent a particularly well-rounded view of the subject matter, right? So you're going to pick 4 distinct sources, and these sources you'll pick on the basis of of the relevance you think they have to explaining your topic and or supporting the thesis you have about that topic, okay? And you may have some indication of the kind of things that you'll want to look for on the basis of the feedback that I gave you to some of your submissions for the thesis assignment. Okay, so you're picking 4 sources, and then for each of those 4 sources, you have to do 3 different things. Okay, you have to provide 3 different things. You have to give the bibliographical information, which is just the stuff that you give on a works cited page in a normal paper. So you should all have a general idea of how to do that. I don't really care about which style guide you use. I don't care if it's MLA. I don't care if it's APA. I don't care if it's Chicago Manual of Style. I don't care. I can't even remember. I don't even know the difference between those really because I don't use them myself. When you write for journals or when you're trying to shop books around to different publishers, they all have their own style and they'll just tell you what to do when you need to format that kind of stuff. So I'm not too worried about that. So that bibliographical information, that's A. B, a brief summary of what the source says. So you're going to kind of give me like the summaries that we do each week for the individual summary. You're going to do that for your source, and you're going to say, okay, well, here's what the author is trying to argue. Here's how they're doing it. Here's, you don't have to analyze it and say whether it's successful or not. What you will do in lieu of that analysis that we usually do in the individual summaries, you'll provide C, a brief statement of how this will help you discuss and or prove your thesis. Okay? So you basically, after summarizing the article, you have to tell me, and this article will help me prove my point because blah, 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 or this article will help me explain what I'm trying to talk about because blah, 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 right? So it shouldn't be too long of an assignment, probably 2-3 pages the most. So the bibliographic information, I have an example of what I mean here, right? So author's last name, first initial, publication date, the name of the article. If it's an article, the name of the journal or like book which you found it from, and then the publisher, right? So that's pretty easy. So like I said, author's name, year of publication, name of source, the publisher of the source. When you do websites, it can sometimes be difficult to find these things, especially publication dates. If you're going to a sort of well-curated, as it were, mainstream website, these pieces of information should all be there. So if you're finding articles from the New York Times or something, they all have bylines, they all have publication dates. If you go to, so 2 good places to find articles online, if you don't want to troll through JSTOR, go to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy or the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy. These both have articles written by actual philosophers which go through peer review and all that kind of good stuff. So they're pretty dependable. I would prefer that you don't directly cite Wikipedia because especially for things which involve a great deal of interpretation, for instance, philosophy and literature, Wikipedia is a really bad source because obviously anyone can write those articles. However, sometimes there can be good references at the bottom of those articles, so you can scroll down to the bibliography and find a mainstream reputable source to use and then read it for yourself and make your interpretations for yourself. So that's how I would like you to go about that. So that's due on the 22nd. If you have any questions about that assignment, please do let me know. Hopefully the directions make it pretty clear there. Okay, so the midterm will, I won't have it graded until next week, along with the rest of the week 7 work. I know I'm very behind on the recaps for the weeks, and I hope that I'll catch up on that. I sort of fall behind on them because they're not crucially important, whereas getting the grades in and getting the actual new content each week is more important. So that's what I end up putting first, and then the recaps kind of get pushed behind the work from my other classes that I have to teach, my face-to-face classes. But I'll hopefully get to them. Okay, so now we're into week 8. We're still on philosophy of mind this week. So this week's philosophy of mind stuff is a bit more technical and a bit more abstract. So we've gone from the sort of stuff that you might have existing opinions on already to stuff where it's all, kind of introducing a lot of technical jargon, a lot of metaphysics type stuff. Philosophy of mind is very heavy on the metaphysics. So this one might be a bit more heavy going and a bit more dry and perhaps boring to some of you, but hopefully you'll find something interesting in there to grasp onto, and you'll troop on through anyway. So week 7, we talked about the mind-body problem, or we sort of posed the mind-body problem. So in the lecture, I talked about René Descartes and his arguments for establishing the distinction between mental substance on the one hand and physical substance on the other, saying, look, they're 2 different things. Okay, they have distinct essential properties, and so they are not the same. There are 2 types of stuff in the universe. And then you looked at Princess Elizabeth's objection to to Descartes' distinction between the mental and the physical, and this is what the mind-body problem is. She was arguing, look, if the mental is this thing which is not extended in space, and the physical is a thing which is extended in space, and they are to interact in some way, right? If the mental is to cause physical action, so if my belief, which is a mental thing, causes me to do something, or let's say my desire for a sandwich causes me to go make a sandwich, right, which is a physical thing, this getting up, moving, making a physical item. Well, how does the mental thing interact with the physical stuff if the mental thing doesn't exist in space, right? So when we talk about sort of the imparting of causal force, we think that it has to occur somewhere. So imagine billiard balls, right? One billiard ball smashes into the other. Why does the second billiard ball, how is it caused to move by the first one? Well, there's an interface and the force is exchanged, right? There's a place where these two objects sort of connect in some way, and then that's where the causal stuff happens. But if there is no interface, there is no nexus of the mental and the physical, how does the mental cause stuff? And so this is the mind-body problem. This is what Elizabeth of Bohemia is pointing out. So this has remained sort of vexed issue in philosophy of mind. And for those wishing to maintain that there is indeed a distinct mental substance, they've had to try and work with this interaction problem. So I've talked about Descartes putting forward this view where there are two different types of thing in the universe. And here we get to some jargon, the difference between, in metaphysics, monism and dualism. That is between monist positions and dualist positions. So monist here from like mono, one, and dualist from duo, two, just to indicate how many types of thing a particular theory claims the universe is made out of, right? So, as I've said, Descartes' philosophy of mind is a dualism. It's a substance dualism. It says that the universe is made of two different types of thing. These things are distinct from each other, and to give a complete explanation of the universe, you need to account for both of these things and their distinct, properties. There's mental stuff and physical stuff, according to Descartes. Now, monist theories, on the other hand, say that the universe is made of one type of stuff. Most of contemporary philosophy of mind has argued in favor of some kind of monism, and some sort of substance monism at least, where they say, look, there's only one type of stuff in the universe, and that's physical, right? So this is a monist theory because it says there's one type of thing. Descartes' theory is a dualist theory because it says there's two types of thing. So physical things, or physical entities, physical properties, physical events, whatever, that's what the physicalist says is the only type of thing. Sometimes, or at least it used to be, this view would be called materialism, right? So sometimes you'll still refer to it, see it referred to as that way. So materialism and monism in the context of philosophy of mind are pretty much the same thing. Now you only really see the word materialism in the context of one particular theory called eliminative materialism, which we don't need to discuss right now. But the stuff that they're referring to are the basic constituents of the universe as identified by a mature and complete physics. So whatever physics says is the most fundamental constituent of the universe, whatever physics sort of quantifies over in its theories, that's the kind of stuff that the physicalist says exists. And the idea is that physics doesn't have any truck with mental entities, right? There are no spirits in physics theories. There are no beliefs in physics theories. There are electrons, there are quarks, there are electromagnetic fields, etc., right? So this is the difference between monism and dualism. And so this week we're talking about physicalist theories, that is the monist theories, which say that there is one and only one type of thing in the universe, and that's physical stuff. And we're going to look at how that theory, we're going to look at one argument in favor of that theory and then an argument sort of against that theory. Or that group of theories. There's a whole bunch of different types. If you were to go and look in the philosophy of mind section of the textbook, you'll see a whole bunch of arguments about physicalism. There's like type physicalism, token physicalism, non-reductive physicalism, a whole bunch of things, and they're very technical arguments. I've picked the ones which I think are the easiest to understand and sort of, in a way, the most interesting and the closest to sort of everyday concerns that I could find. We'll see how that goes. Okay, first one, the argument for physicalism. This is called the mental causation argument for physicalism. Let's go through the premises. Premise 1, actions are caused by physical events in the brain. Premise 2, actions are caused by mental events. First conclusion, either mental events are identical with physical events in the brain, or actions are caused by both mental and physical events in the brain. Premise 3, all of the options in which actions are caused by mental events and by physical events in the brain, while mental events are not identical to brain events, should be rejected. And here are the three options: causal overdetermination, mental to physical causal cooperation, and mixed mental physical causal chains. Conclusion 2, mental events are identical with physical events in the brain, and that's the end, right? So, like I said, these sound very technical and they're very jargony. There's lots of purpose-made philosophy of mind lingo in here that you're not really going to find anywhere else. So let's go through all this. Actions are caused by physical events in the brain, and actions are caused by mental events. So these two are supposed to be common sense, right? So they're conjoined. It's premise 1 and 2, which is supposed to set up this tension or this dilemma, right? So we think, oh yeah, actions are caused by physical events in the brain. So when you're angry, right, or when you sort of yell at somebody, there's some kind of electrochemical thing going on in your brain that causes you to yell. Or let's not just talk about the brain, let's talk about the whole body. Being hungry is caused by a state of your stomach, right? Your digestive system, your general metabolic state. And then actions are also caused by mental events. Well, this is supposed to be common sense as well. When we describe why people did things, we tend to do it in mental language. Why didn't she go outside today? Oh, well, she thought it was really cold and she didn't have any winter clothes. So why didn't she go outside? Well, she believed that it was cold, or she believed, let's say that it was stormy. She believed that it was really windy and nasty outside today, so she didn't go outside. So a belief is usually taken to be a mental thing. Why did you go to the grocery store? Oh, because I had a craving for ice cream, right? So a craving, a desire is a mental thing. So there's evidence for this kind of stuff, right? There's at least evidence for the physical events. We can do neuroimaging and lesion studies to show the connection between physical events and actions. And then just, like as I said, the way that we explain stuff and predict behavior, to a certain degree, a great deal of psychology, counseling is based on this idea that mental events do causal work. So those should be pretty straightforward. Now, this next part is the main part of the argument. So all of the options in which actions are caused by both mental events and by physical events in the brain, while mental events are not identical to brain events, should be rejected. So this part, while mental events are not identical to brain events. What this means when they say identical, and usually when you hear the word, the phrase identical to, in the context of a philosophical argument, it means that these two things are actually one thing, right? So when we talk about identical twins, we mean that there are two people that look alike, right? When we say that these two cars are identical, we mean these two cars look the same way. What we say in sort of philosophy, in a logical context, when two things are identical, is we mean that they're actually one thing, right? So Clark Kent and Superman are not two different bodies, right? Clark Kent and Superman are the same person in a sense, right? They're the same physical person. Peter Parker and Spider-Man, same physical person, right? Like water and H2O are the same thing, right? There's not two things, water and H2O, and they're a lot alike. There's just one thing, okay? So when they say that an option which says mental events are not identical to brain events, they mean, well, there's this thing in your brain, this electrochemical activity, and then there's this other thing, which is a belief or a desire, which is not the same as, which is not reducible to this brain event. Okay, so the three options presented in which there are mental events, physical events, and they are distinct from each other in the same way that Descartes says that mental and physical things are distinct from each other, are as follows, and we're supposed to reject all of these. Causal overdetermination, mental physical causal cooperation, and mixed mental physical causal chains. We're not given an explanation in the premises themselves as to why we're supposed to reject these things, but this is what does the work of the argument. It says the only options in which there are really distinct mental events, which aren't just reducible to physical events, are all bad and we should reject them. Now, given that they're all bad and we should reject them, that means that there are only physical events. So what are these three options in which mental events are their own separate things, and why should we reject them? Let's go through them in order. Causal overdetermination, right? So determination just means if one thing determines another, it makes it happen, right? It makes it the way it is. Overdetermination means that there is more stuff than is necessary to make something the way it is. So something is causally overdetermined when a given action has two causal chains, one mental and one physical, either of which would be sufficient to cause the relevant action on their own. All right, what would an example of that be? So imagine that we think your desire for a sandwich, which is a mental thing, and your hunger, which is a physical thing, are distinct from each other, right? Your desire doesn't cause your hunger doesn't cause your desire. Well, they might cause each other, but they're sort of, in this example, they're supposed to be independent, right? So they don't cause each other. Well, the idea is that hunger could all by itself, without the desire for a sandwich, hunger for a sandwich, could make you go do the physical thing of getting up and making a sandwich, all by itself. On the other hand, your desire for a sandwich could also, on its own, all by itself, make you get up and go make a sandwich. So each of these things, in the absence of the other, could make you go get the sandwich. And so when you go make the sandwich and both of them happen, you're sort of having these two things they're doing like redundant work. That's the idea. So causal overdetermination is saying that one of these factors is sort of redundant. Why shouldn't we accept that there's causal overdetermination? Well, the idea is that there's no plausible example of overdetermination found outside of the realm of the kind of mental and physical explanations for actions, right? There's no causal overdetermination out in the purely physical world. Now, this is there's a lot of debate about whether or not there are any genuine instances of causal overdetermination. There's a paper by someone I can't remember. There's a well-known argument in which you're to imagine like two assassins who are trying to kill the same person at the same time, and they are each sort of in their sort of sniper's perch, and they each, at the exact same moment from the exact same distance, shoot at their target, and each of their bullets hit the target directly in the heart from opposite directions at the exact same time, right? So that's the kind of setup we have. The idea is here, well, the target dies. And given the description of the situation, if one or the other of the assassins had not fired, the person would still die, right? And so this is supposed to be it's a contrived example of purely physical overdetermination. So it's at least logically possible that such things happen, but this kind of hasn't persuaded a lot of people that that gives us any reason to think that it does happen in the mental physical case. So we have to take a lot for granted in the way that this argument is presented in the textbook, but I'm just kind of explaining what it's saying to you. 2. Mental physical causal cooperation. So an action has two causal chains, and when I talk about a causal chain, like chains, like links, there's, so think about a string of dominoes, right? Each domino is a link in a causal chain. It falls over, it hits the next thing, that falls over, hits the next thing, and then, when the last one falls and it like hits a button, that causes the thing to happen, right? So each domino is a link in the chain. So when you think about two causal chains, you could think about two rows of dominoes sort of falling over at the same time, and the last one on each row falls and hits the button. And so in overdetermination, both dominoes hit the button at the same time, right? Mental physical causal cooperation. A given action has two causal chains, one mental and one physical, which together, but not alone, would be sufficient to cause the relevant action. So it's kind of hard to imagine this one in terms of dominoes, but you can sort of imagine maybe two different colors of domino, and they are sort of spaced in such a way so that they're arranged in such a way so that there's a different, it alternates, sort of like blue, red, blue, red, blue, red, right? Blue, let's say, is physical, red is mental, and it's spaced such that if you moved one of the red ones, the blue one would fall and it wouldn't reach the next blue one. If you moved one of the red ones, right, it wouldn't work. You have to have all of them together, or something like that. So in this case, you have to have both causal chains working in conjunction to get the relevant physical action. So going back to our concrete example of making a sandwich, the idea here is that being hungry isn't by itself enough to go make you get the sandwich. That's the physical one. Desiring a sandwich isn't on its own enough to make you get up and make the sandwich. You have to have both the desire and the hunger together, and then those together will make you go get up and make the sandwich. So that's what causal cooperation here would be. Why isn't this plausible? The idea is that this is theoretically motivated, right? So theoretically motivated, remember, is what we say about something when it's a proposal put forth only because it gets you the conclusion that you want, right? So the idea is that this only works if you think that mental causation is a thing already. So it may be more than theoretically motivated, it may be circular, right? We're trying to support the existence of mental causation, because physical causation is sort of taken for granted, right? We see that all the time. I push a box over, it's the contact of my hand and the imparting of force from my hand to the box, which makes it fall over on the table. So physical causation is taken for granted, and now we're trying to see whether there's any space for mental causation to do anything. So in that context, the mental physical causal cooperation kind of begs the question. It assumes already that mental causation does something, but we're trying to prove that mental causation does something. Finally, mixed mental physical causal chains. So a given action has one causal chain which features both mental and physical events. So the domino example I gave in mental physical causation actually better describes this mixed causal chain. For the mental physical causal cooperation, we'd need the two colors of dominoes again, but they'd have to be not stacked like this. They'd have to be somehow doing some weird Rube Goldberg OK Go video thing, where you have to have the red buttons or the red dominoes fall, hit the blue button, which makes something up here hit the blue dominoes, which fall, hit the red button, and then that makes you go get a sandwich or whatever. It's kind of hard to explain these things in any concrete terms, but hopefully it's being clear enough. So these mixed mental, physical, causal chains, there's one causal chain which has both mental and physical events in it. So why doesn't this work? So there is something called, there's a principle in this discussion, or in the realm of this discussion, which is called the causal closure of the physical, which is observed in all other physiological explanations. So as I explain here, that means that other bodily movements and the behavior of simple creatures feature no mental links in their causal chains. So when we talk about the, when we explain the behavior of a phototropic plant, we only use physical stuff. We use photon impact, absorption into chloroplasts, and then sort of redirection towards the light source. When we talk about amoeba and simple organisms like that, they have some sort of chemical senses, and when a particular chemical indicator is at the correct distance, the amoeba or whatever starts moving towards the higher concentration of that chemical indicator until it reaches the source and then eats it or whatever. Those are all purely physical descriptions. So we can explain the behavior of all these simpler creatures and of all these sort of non-creature things like billiard balls and so forth with only physical events. So there doesn't seem to be a clear reason right off the bat to suddenly, when we're talking about the behavior of more complex creatures, start putting in this new type of event, okay? When it seems that it's perfectly consistent or sufficient, usually, to stick to purely physical descriptions. So these are the kind of built-in reasons that aren't specifically talked about in the argument for why we should reject those three options. So assuming that we should, in fact, reject those three options, then there is no space left for mental events to do any genuine causal work. And so the idea is that they don't exist as things separate from physical events. They will instead be identical. So we will have not two types of substance, not two types of events, but one type of event which we talk about in two different ways, okay? So this type of explanation usually goes to what's called sometimes a property dualism, where there are still such things as mental properties, but they're really just different ways of describing physical properties, physical events and objects. There's no real mental stuff. There's just mental ways of talking, right? That's kind of where this argument is going. And then I mentioned earlier eliminative materialism. Eliminative materialism goes one step further and says these mental ways of talking are actually gibberish and make no sense. So for the most part, the argument that we're looking at right here says, well, mental talk makes sense and it's sometimes useful, but it doesn't refer to anything real. Eliminative materialism says it doesn't refer to anything real and it also makes no sense and is useless. Okay? So there's a kind of a spectrum. There's substance dualism over here, which says, okay, there are two types of thing, mental and physical, and of course two corresponding types of talk for them. Both types of talk refer to real stuff, and both types of talk make sense and are useful. We have sort of what we're talking about right now, this physicalism on the basis of the mental causation argument, which says, well, there's only physical stuff, but then there's physical ways to talk about the physical stuff, mental ways to talk about the physical stuff. Both of those ways make sense and are useful. And then all the way over here, we have eliminative materialism, which says there's only physical stuff, and there are only physical ways of talking about that physical stuff that make any sense. As a matter of being sort of logically complete, over here on the other side of Cartesian dualism, there's actually views which say, really there's only mental stuff. And so we could sort of duplicate what we're talking about here, except say, oh, there's only mental stuff. There are physical ways of talking about mental stuff, but they don't refer to anything. We could have like a mental eliminativism way over here, which says there's only mental stuff, and only the mental ways of talking about it make any sense. But no one actually advocates for that position way over there. In the history of philosophy of mind, there's once or twice a person who says that only mental things exist. So Bishop George Berkeley, who's an Irish philosopher of the 17th century, says that there are only mental things. There's no such thing as matter. So he would be putting one of those way left over there theories. But for the most part, it goes from Cartesian dualism to this sort of physicalism that we're talking about now, and then a couple of people who argue for this eliminative materialism. So when we say that mental events are identical with physical events in the brain, we are giving what's called a reductive explanation. So the mental is reduced to the physical, right? Sort of absorbed into it. So instead of there being two distinct types of things, the physical sort of eats up the mental, right? Says, oh no, there's only one type of thing. And as I've already said, we talk about it in two different ways. And this goes back to what I said earlier. When in a philosophical argument we're talking about two things being identified, we're saying that two things are actually just one thing, right? So 2 plus 2 equals 4 is saying 2 plus 2 is just the exact same thing as 4. There's not this separate entity 2 plus 2 and then this entity 4 and they just look alike. There's one entity which is expressed in different ways. Okay. And in sort of more physical terms, water is identified with H2O. If it's water, then it's H2O. Heat is identified with mean molecular kinetic motion. There aren't two things, there's just one, so on and so forth. So some criticism of this. Now, this mental talk that we have, some people say, look, well, we have this special mental talk, and this shows that there's something at least unusual about the events that we give this mental talk to. That there is some reason to think that there might be something else going on. Now, it's not clear how motivating this intuition is. It almost sounds like, it's kind of circular reasoning again, or it's maybe sort of trying to make us feel special, right? So we want to explain our behavior in terms of something more than just like clockwork explanations. So it's because we're special that we have this special talk, and we don't want to give it up because then we wouldn't feel special anymore, right? That's sort of one suspicious way of looking at this point. And then some people argue that causal overdetermination is not generally impossible, and that physical overdetermination really exists out there in the world, and given that it does, we then have some sort of principled reason to believe that there might be physical mental causal overdetermination, so we can't just dismiss it out of hand like this argument does. We have to actually do some work to prove that we should reject that possibility. All right, so that's the end of the first part of this, where we have given an argument in favor of physicalism, and you can go back to the beginning to remember what physicalism is. And the next part, I'm going to look at an argument against physicalism.